Imagine walking into a sprawling, beautiful public park.
Okay.
Like one built specifically for human connection,
Yeah.
liberation.
Sounds nice.
Right. But as you walk through the grass, you realize the architects secretly embedded a microscopic camera into every single blade of grass.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The ultimate space for freedom was like completely invisibly retrofitted into this inescapable prison.
Wow. And, that paradox right there, that is really the defining geopolitical tension of our era. We are looking at a digital landscape that was engineered to set us free, right? But it is actively being weaponized into an architecture of just absolute turnkey totalitarianism.
It's wild to think about.
Yeah.
So today we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating piece of source material. We're pulling apart a transcribed discussion, which is essentially a kind of manifesto.
Right.
It was published as a book called Cypherpunk, Freedom and the Future of the Internet.
Yeah, that's a heavy-hitting one.
It really is. It features this intense dialogue between Julian Assange, Jacob Appelbaum, Andy Mueller-Magoon, and Jeremy Zimmerman. And the mission for this deep dive today is to decode their cypherpunk philosophy. Understand the invisible mechanics powering modern mass surveillance and explore this really radical concept of using cryptography to defend your basic human freedoms.
Right, but I think before we go any further, we really need to establish a baseline for this text.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the material we are unpacking today, it dives into some highly charged political territory.
Very much so.
It levels severe criticisms at Western governments, global intelligence agencies, multinational corporations.
Yeah, and to be crystal clear with everyone listening, we are not taking sides here.
Exactly.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, and we aren't condemning them either. Our role today is strictly to unpack and, impartially report the factual claims and the philosophical arguments contained within this specific text.
Right, just laying it out there.
Right, so you can evaluate them for yourself. We're laying out their perspective, explaining how they believe the world works, and leaving the final judgment totally up to you.
Spot on. Oh, and just quickly, for anyone who doesn't know, we should probably define what a cypherpunk actually is.
Oh, good call. Yeah.
So a cypherpunk, the term was actually added to the Oxford English Dictionary back in 2006. It basically refers to someone who advocates using cryptography and, similar privacy-enhancing tech as a tool for social and political change.
Right, like using math to fight back.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's unpack this. If the internet was fundamentally designed at its core to be this decentralized tool for liberation, how did it become a surveillance machine?
Right, well, the sources point to a very distinct evolution in how spying actually operates.
Okay.
They talk about the shift from tactical to strategic surveillance.
Tactical meaning what exactly?
So historically, surveillance was tactical, meaning it was constrained by physical reality. If an intelligence agency wanted to listen to a specific person of interest, they had to expend immense physical resources.
As if they couldn't just click a button.
No, they had to pay agents to physically tail the person. They had to physically break into an office, wire a literal microphone into a desk lamp.
Right, real James Bond stuff.
Exactly. It was targeted, it usually required a warrant, and the logistics of it just made it incredibly expensive. You couldn't do it to everyone.
Wait, so logistically, how is a strategic approach even possible then? Recording the communications of an entire nation sounds like it would require, a hard drive the size of the moon.
Well, it used to.
Yeah.
But the source material explains that the plummeting cost of digital storage and processing, just how cheap it got, has birthed this strategic model.
Okay.
Strategic surveillance doesn't bother picking a target beforehand.
They just grab it all.
They just grab it all. The new logic is intercept everything from everyone, everywhere, universally, and store it permanently. Yeah, you don't need to know who the suspect is today. You just search the database 10 years from now when someone suddenly becomes, politically inconvenient.
That is terrifying. How do they physically do that, though?
The mechanics of it actually rely on fiber optic splitters.
Okay.
Intelligence agencies literally tap directly into the main undersea internet backbone cables. They split the beam of light that carries global internet traffic, and they just copy it wholesale into their own data centers.
Wow. And the numbers they use in the text to illustrate the cost efficiency of this are just staggering.
Oh, they really are.
They calculate that the cost to intercept and record every single telephone call made in the entire country of Germany
Right.
for a full year with good audio quality, would only be about 30 million euros.
It's nothing.
Right. And the actual storage cost is just another 8 million euros.
Yeah.
I mean, a medium-sized corporation could afford that, let alone a massive nation-state.
Absolutely. And the text even cites the French company, Amicis.
Oh, right, the Eagle system.
Yeah, they literally sold their Eagle mass surveillance system to Muammar Gaddafi's regime in Libya.
Wow.
Gaddafi literally bought mass surveillance in a box just off the shelf to monitor the entire nation's communications.
So it flips the entire concept of a criminal investigation backward.
Completely.
It becomes this automated interception of the entire human population's digital lives.
Yeah.
Just by default.
By default, yeah.
But, I always hear the same counter-argument from people, and I feel like I have to push back on the premise here for a second.
Sure, go for it.
People always say, well, if you have nothing to hide
Ah, right.
and you aren't doing anything illegal, why should you care if a machine is blindly collecting your metadata in some server farm somewhere?
Right, the classic nothing to hide argument. Well, what's fascinating here is how the source answers that exact sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
They refer to this dynamic as the militarization of cyberspace.
The militarization of cyberspace.
Yeah. Think about it. When you send a private, intimate text message to your spouse, you assume that space is sacred.
Right, it's just between the two of you.
Exactly. But the physical reality of strategic surveillance means that military intelligence is effectively sitting on the edge of the bed between you and your spouse.
Oh, man, when you put it like that.
Right. The civil space of your private life has been totally annexed by a military intelligence apparatus.
Wow.
You aren't necessarily doing anything wrong, sure, but you are living under constant, invisible military occupation.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we have to ask who is actually running this occupation.
Right.
Because it isn't just, men in dark suits and windowless government buildings.
No, not at all.
It is the Silicon Valley platforms we voluntarily use every single day.
Yeah, the line between the state and the private sector has essentially just dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
The text details how U.S. intelligence agencies and these major tech corporations act in what they call a cybersecurity partnership.
Right.
The government uses administrative tools to legally demand user data without actually needing a judge to issue a traditional search warrant.
And a prime example of that in the text is the 2703D order.
Yes.
Explain how that mechanism actually works, because I think people hear the word subpoena and they think, oh, it's a standard police procedure. A judge signed it.
Right. So under the U.S. Stored Communications Act, a traditional search warrant requires probable cause.
Okay.
Which is a pretty high legal bar. It's meant to protect you from arbitrary searches.
Right.
But a 2703D order only requires what they call specific and articulable facts.
Which is what?
It just means they have to suggest the records are somehow relevant to an investigation. It is a significantly lower legal hurdle.
Wow.
It allows agencies to just vacuum up massive amounts of metadata from tech companies without ever having to convince a judge you actually committed a crime.
It effectively bypasses constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure.
Completely. By exploiting what's known as the third-party doctrine.
Yeah.
Because you gave your data to a third party, the tech company, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy anymore.
That is so wild. And the sources make this chilling comparison between this modern dynamic and the Stasi in East Germany.
Oh yeah, the Stasi comparison is heavy.
Right, because the Stasi had to rely on coercion or, financial payments to get informants to spy on their neighbors.
Right, it was hard work.
But the genius of modern surveillance is that it's gamified.
Yeah.
These platforms reward you with social currency. Likes, retweets, finding out who is dating whom, all to get you to voluntarily surrender your most private data. We are literally the informants on ourselves.
We really are. And the internal terminology used within these corporate database architectures, it just tells the whole story.
Right.
The text points out that when you look at the back end of these massive social media platforms, the individuals whose data is being harvested, they are not referred to as customers.
Where did I get home?
The database architecture explicitly labels them as targets.
Targets. Wow. It makes me think of moving into a luxury high-rise apartment building where the rent is completely free.
Okay.
But the catch is, the landlord legally mandated that all the walls are made of transparent glass.
Oh, gosh.
And they sell tickets to behavioral psychologists and police officers to just stand outside and watch you sleep and eat and argue.
Wow.
You aren't the tenant in that scenario. Your life is the reality show being sold to the highest bidder.
That is exactly it. And this ties directly into the geopolitical leverage of data sovereignty.
Okay.
Because the text heavily critiques this whole shift toward cloud computing.
Right, putting everything in the cloud.
Right. We outsource all of our data to these centralized server farms that are heavily based in one specific jurisdiction, which is usually the United States. When you give up local control of your data for the convenience of the cloud, you're basically handing foreign jurisdictions the leverage to dictate what you can and cannot do.
Which is terrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
And that paves the way for something far more aggressive than just passive surveillance. It paves the way for economic censorship.
Okay, let's follow that thread. Because the source material outlines 3 fundamental freedoms required for a functioning state and a free individual.
Right.
There's freedom of physical movement, freedom of communication,
Yeah.
and freedom of economic exchange.
Exactly. And once centralized corporate and state powers have a monopoly on the digital infrastructure, they don't just watch you. They exert control by targeting that third freedom, the economic exchange.
Because you need money to live.
Right. The fastest way to neutralize a target isn't putting them in jail, it's freezing their wallet.
And the deep dive specifically examines the banking blockade against WikiLeaks to illustrate this.
Yes.
When WikiLeaks started publishing those classified diplomatic cables, major financial institutions, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Bank of America, they all simultaneously severed their services.
Just cut them off.
Right. They blocked anyone in the entire world from donating to the organization. The terrifying aspect of this is the complete lack of due process.
Whatsoever.
No judge ordered this. There was no trial. It was an extrajudicial financial blockade executed by centralized corporate monopolies at the informal behest of political powers in Washington.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates that the state now relies on the centralized financial sector as a vital choke point.
The choke point, yeah.
The text highlights the geographic absurdity of this centralization with a very specific scenario.
Okay.
Imagine 2 Russian citizens living inside Russia making a local domestic transaction.
Like buying a coffee.
Exactly. One person buying a coffee from a cafe in Moscow using a Visa card.
Right.
That transaction data does not stay in Russia.
It doesn't.
No, it is routed through and processed in a U.S. data center.
Wow.
That architectural reality gives a foreign intelligence apparatus immediate, real-time access to and potential control over local economic activity on the exact other side of the planet.
But, I mean, how is digital tracking fundamentally different from the analog past, though?
What do you mean?
Well, didn't the local banker in a small town in, like, the 1950s always know exactly what you were spending your money on?
Well, the difference is scale, permanence, and automation.
Okay.
In the analog world, cash was the ultimate guarantor of private economic interaction.
Right. Cash is untraceable.
When you handed someone a physical banknote, that peer-to-peer transaction was anonymous and mathematically untraceable by the broader system.
Yeah.
The local banker might know you took out a mortgage, sure, but they couldn't track what you bought at the farmer's market.
That makes sense.
But today, because every digital transaction is indexed, categorized, and stored forever by centralized clearinghouses, authorities have the power to instantly dictate what activities or individuals are allowed to exist at all. They can simply flip a switch in a server room and completely delete your ability to participate in the global economy.
So if human laws fail to protect you,
Right.
if politicians are compromised, and if the corporate platforms we rely on are complicit, what defense is actually left for the individual?
Yeah, it sounds bleak.
It does. But this is where the core realization of the cypherpunk movement comes into focus.
Exactly. They realize that the universe possesses a very specific asymmetrical property. Physics inherently favors encryption.
Physics favors encryption.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a mathematical reality that it is exponentially easier to encrypt a piece of information than it is to decrypt it.
To put that in perspective,
Yeah.
it has kind of like mixing paint.
Right.
Like if you take yellow and blue paint,
Right.
it takes you 2 seconds to mix those drops together to create green paint.
Super easy.
But if you handed someone that green puddle and said, okay, unmix this back into the exact original molecular drops of yellow and blue,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
it would take a supercomputer thousands of years to do that.
Exact.
And in cryptography, multiplying 2 massive prime numbers together takes milliseconds. But factoring that massive result back into its original primes, it's practically impossible for modern computers.
Right. And that asymmetrical math is exactly why the text refers to cryptography as the ultimate form of nonviolent direct action.
Nonviolent direct action. I love that phrase.
It's brilliant because you can take a political dissident, throw them in a cell, and apply infinite physical violence to their body.
Right.
But you cannot solve a complex math problem with a truncheon.
Wow.
The state's monopoly on physical violence just completely breaks down when confronted with strong cryptography.
And this philosophy didn't just stay in academic white papers either. It birthed practical tools. And the most famous one explored in the deep dive is Bitcoin.
Yes, absolutely.
Bitcoin was engineered as a cryptographic workaround to the exact kind of economic censorship WikiLeaks experienced.
Right. It achieves this by replacing the centralized authority of, say, a central bank or a CEO at PayPal with a decentralized algorithm and global consensus.
Okay.
Bitcoin relies on a distributed ledger maintained by thousands of independent nodes around the world.
So there's no central choke point.
Exactly. To execute a banking blockade against a Bitcoin wallet, you would have to physically shut down thousands of independent computers across hundreds of sovereign nations simultaneously.
Which is impossible.
It makes arbitrary financial blockades mathematically impossible.
The text is intellectually honest about this, though. They openly acknowledge Bitcoin has distinct flaws.
Oh, for sure.
It suffers from massive price volatility, which makes it difficult to use as an everyday currency for most people.
Yeah, that's a big hurdle.
Furthermore, the anonymity isn't exactly perfect because the ledger is completely public.
Right.
If a state intelligence agency can link your real-world identity to your cryptographic wallet address, they can basically trace your entire financial history.
True. But the fundamental censorship resistance remains intact.
Right. It's the difference between relying on human legislation versus relying on the laws of physics.
Exactly.
Human laws, constitutions, privacy regulations, oversight committees, they're effectively paper dams.
Paper dams.
That's right. They look impressive. But as soon as enough political pressure or national security fear builds up, the paper tears and the surveillance floods in.
That's a great way to put it.
But cryptography is a dam built out of gravity itself. You cannot bribe gravity. You cannot subpoena a mathematical equation.
You really can't. And the source material argues that trying to control the surveillance state with those paper dams always fails.
Always.
They point specifically to the Swedish FRA law.
What was that?
So the legislation was originally sold to the public as a targeted way to regulate military signal intelligence.
Sounds reasonable enough.
Right. But mission creep inevitably transformed it into a legal framework for massive sweeping surveillance of civilian internet traffic crossing Swedish borders.
Of course it did.
Or look at the U.S. Patriot Act. It was ostensibly written to target bad actors, but because the physical architecture of the internet routes global traffic centrally, the state inevitably ends up vacuuming up everyone's data.
Right.
Human oversight simply cannot keep pace with the automated nature of the technology.
Which brings up the most critical lever of control. How do governments convince a free public to willingly accept this level of strategic surveillance?
Exactly.
How do they convince you to give up your cryptographic tools?
They use fear.
Fear.
The text introduces a concept called the Four Horsemen of the Information Apocalypse.
I remember this. It's child pornography, terrorism, money laundering, and drugs.
Exactly. These are four extreme, emotionally horrifying justifications that are consistently invoked to mandate mass surveillance and destroy public privacy.
Right.
The argument presented to the public is always binary. They say, if we allow citizens to have unbreakable encryption, the Four Horsemen will run rampant. Therefore, the state must have cryptographic backdoors into all communication.
Right. And obviously nobody wants to defend terrorism or child exploitation.
No, of course not. But the cypherpunks argue this is a manipulative, false choice.
Okay.
Sacrificing the basic privacy of the entire global population, subjecting billions of innocent people to a permanent digital panopticon, is a vastly disproportionate and ultimately destructive response to policing those specific crimes.
Right.
They basically use the worst actors in society to justify putting everyone in a glass box.
So what does this all mean? When the state has that level of surveillance access, how does censorship actually manifest in a modern Western democracy?
That's the real question.
Because it isn't, men in black boots kicking down the doors of a newspaper or burning books in a town square.
No, it's much quieter than that.
Exactly. The source material details how modern censorship is quiet. It relies on economic pressure, self-censorship, and subtle redactions.
And this raises an important question about who we actually trust to filter reality.
Right.
The text provides very specific examples of this from the WikiLeaks releases, pointing out how prestigious Western media outlets subtly protected the powerful while simultaneously claiming to champion transparency.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
Right. For instance, the source notes that the New York Times actively redacted the names of specific corrupt oil companies operating in Libya from the leaked diplomatic cables.
They didn't just hide the names of vulnerable human sources.
No?
They protected the massive corporations directly benefiting from geopolitical corruption.
Exactly. And The Guardian did the exact same thing.
Wow.
The text highlights how The Guardian removed specific documented allegations of corruption against wealthy elites in Kazakhstan, and similarly redacted information regarding the massive wealth of politicians in Ukraine.
Unbelievable.
They filtered the truth to protect the powerful, all while presenting themselves as the vanguard of a free press.
It really is the ultimate manifestation of the George Orwell quote invoked in the text.
Oh, yeah. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past.
Right. When centralized entities, whether they are state intelligence agencies, Silicon Valley tech monopolies, or legacy media institutions, when they have the unilateral power to quietly rewrite the digital record, alter search algorithms, or redact names without true public accountability, they are actively controlling the historical narrative.
They really are. And, the foundational goal of the cypherpunk movement is brilliantly simple to understand when you look at it through that lens.
Privacy for the weak, transparency for the powerful.
Exactly. If you are an individual citizen, your life should be private, period.
Right.
If you are a government or a massive corporation wielding authority, your actions should be entirely transparent.
But the digital architecture we've built over the last 20 years has facilitated the exact inverse of that.
The complete opposite.
We live in a world that offers total, impenetrable privacy for state and corporate secrets and inescapable transparency and surveillance for the average citizen.
Yeah.
The power dynamic is completely inverted.
And the cypherpunks argue that unless you actively reclaim your privacy using cryptographic tools, unless you learn to build the mathematical architecture of your own freedom, that inverted power dynamic will become permanent.
Which is a pretty stark warning.
It is. The physical tools for liberation exist, but they are entirely useless unless they are understood and adopted by the public.
Right. Which brings us to the end of this journey. We've explored the hidden mechanics of strategic mass surveillance, unpacking how fiber optic wiretaps and legal loopholes transform the internet into a panopticon.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We did. We've examined the extreme vulnerability of centralized cloud infrastructure and traditional finance, and we've decoded how the physics of cryptography offers a mathematical shield for human rights.
And that leaves us with a final concept to consider, drawn straight from the source's discussion on censorship.
Okay.
The text argues that the only legitimate place for information filtering to happen is in the end user, between the ears.
Between the ears. Meaning, it is entirely your responsibility to evaluate information, to decide what is true, what is dangerous, and what is valuable.
Exactly.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If we continue to passively allow centralized authorities and opaque algorithms to filter the internet to quote-unquote protect us from harmful ideas,
Right.
will human beings eventually lose the cognitive muscle required to critically evaluate truth and danger for themselves?
Wow.
By constantly outsourcing your judgment to a machine, to a tech monopoly, or to a state intelligence agency, are you slowly encrypting your own mind against reality?
That's heavy.
Just like a physical prison degrades the muscles of those locked inside, a frictionless, invisible digital prison might just degrade our ability to think freely at all. Keep that in mind next time you log on.